Travel with Miss Marple beyond crime and mystery into the lost brilliance of the Islamic Golden Age, an era where knowledge shaped the world. Together, we uncover how this golden light rose, how it dimmed, and the timeless warning its scholars left behind for all generations. Chapter 1: The Torn Manuscript in St. Mary Mead. On a misty Tuesday morning in St. Mary Mead, when the village still yawned itself awake, Miss Marple stumbled upon something that simply did not belong. It was sitting quietly, almost shyly, on the wooden return trolley of the village library. A leather-bound book, older than any Miss Marple had seen, its spine cracked like desert earth, and its cover stamped with strange geometric patterns. Miss Marple had only meant to return a borrowed gardening guide, but the unusual book captured her attention instantly. She lifted it gently, surprised by its weight. "How peculiar," she murmured, running a gloved finger over its embossed surface. The librarian, Mrs. Weatherby, shook her head. "I've never seen that book before. Must have been mixed in by mistake. Looks foreign. Arabic, perhaps." Miss Marple opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped between two blank fly-leaves, lay a loose sheet of parchment, yellowed, brittle, and clipped at the edge as though violently torn. Its ink shimmered dull brown with age. Only one line could still be read. "The Golden Age ended when curiosity dimmed." Miss Marple blinked. A shiver passed through her, not of fear, but of recognition. A mystery had landed, quite literally, in her hands. She looked up, eyes bright behind her spectacles. "This isn't just a misplaced book, Mrs. Weatherby. Someone brought it here for a reason." And just like that, the calm village morning tilted into the first steps of an investigation. Miss Marple settled into her familiar window seat, the book resting on the small table beside her. Sunlight, filtered through lace curtains, illuminated the symbols carefully drawn along the parchment's margins. She leaned closer, circles within circles, lines radiating outward like rays, and tiny script looping elegantly between them. A scholar's mark, Miss Marple deduced. But not merely decorative, there was intention in the pattern. At the center of the design, a single phrase in Arabic caught her eye. While she was not fluent, years of solving little puzzles and deciphering obscure clues had given her the habit of noticing what mattered. The phrase repeated throughout the manuscript, like a thematic stamp. Halkit Olnur, the circle of light. That name tugged at something faintly familiar. Miss Marple fetched a slim dictionary from the shelf, flipping pages briskly. Light circle, wisdom. Baghdad. A memory surfaced. An article she once read about the House of Wisdom, the legendary center of knowledge during the Islamic Golden Age. Could this manuscript be connected? She reread the line on the torn parchment. The Golden Age ended when curiosity dimmed. What Golden Age? The Abbasids' flourishing era of science and scholarship. And why would someone tear away the rest of the page? Her instincts sharpened. Missing pages were rarely innocent things. Miss Marple did not have long to wonder. By early afternoon, a knock sounded at her cottage door. Standing outside was a young man in a tweed jacket, breathless and dusted with travel. "Miss Jane Marple?" he asked, slightly in awe, as though meeting a legend. "Yes," she replied warmly but alert. "I'm Dr. Andrew Hale, historian at Oxford. I believe you've found something that belongs to us, or rather, to the world." He explained that a rare manuscript from the Abbasid period had gone missing en route to Oxford's Oriental Studies department. The tracking ended near St. Mary Mead. Someone had slipped it into the library unnoticed. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "And you think I might help, Dr. Hale? You're the most insightful investigator England has," he said earnestly. "And this manuscripteth, it's the one we think may contain surviving notes from scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. Notes believed to be destroyed centuries ago." He paused, lowering his voice. "And the symbol you found, the circle of light, it was a secret scholarly society in Baghdad, a collective dedicated to preserving human knowledge. Rumor says they predicted the fall of their age long before it happened." Miss Marple's heart fluttered with the quiet thrill she always felt when a mystery turned real. She invited him in for tea. Over the next hour, Dr. Hale shared astonishing details. How Baghdad once shone as the world's scientific capital, how scholars from many cultures worked together, how advances in astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and engineering transformed civilization. Miss Marple, listening with rapt attention, traced the torn edges of the parchment. "Someone tore this page deliberately," she said. "Someone wanted to hide whatever comes after that sentence." Dr. Hale nodded grimly. "That missing page may explain why the Golden Age collapsed." Miss Marple leaned back, thoughtful. "Then we must find it." Together, they opened the manuscript on Miss Marple's writing desk. The pages were filled with diagrams, astronomical sketches, mathematical notations, and thoughtful marginal comments. Miss Marple immediately noticed a pattern others might miss. The circle of light symbol appeared at chapter openings like a breadcrumb trail guiding readers. At the bottom of one page, in faded ink, she found a note in Arabic script with a small English translation scribbled beneath it. Perhaps by a previous researcher. "Knowledge begins where fear ends." Miss Marple breathed out slowly. "A culture that celebrates knowledge," she said, "must have begun with great courage, and likely ended when courage faltered." As they read further, names appeared, ones Miss Marple vaguely recognized. Al-Khwarizmi, father of algebra. Ibn Sina, whose medical encyclopedia guided Europe for centuries. Ibn al-Haytham, pioneer of scientific experimentation. Al-Razi, early physician and chemist. Each name was followed by a short, reflective statement, almost like a coded message from the past. Then Miss Marple saw it. Beneath Al-Khwarizmi's section was the faint outline of a symbol, and beside it, in English, "The rise was built on curiosity. The fall began when curiosity dimmed." Her pulse quickened. The torn page echoed the same idea. Someone, Miss Marple whispered, wanted to erase the truth behind this fall. Dr. Hale leaned closer. "Miss Marple, I think we need to go to Baghdad." She lifted her head, eyes shining with quiet certainty. "Yes," she said. "History is asking us to follow its trail." That evening, as dusk painted the village rooftops lavender and gold, Miss Marple packed a small trunk. She did not travel often, but when she did, it was always for a reason. She placed the manuscript inside a protective sleeve and slipped it into her handbag. Then she sat a moment in her armchair, gazing out at the peaceful English garden. It was difficult to imagine that thousands of miles away, the ruins of a once great intellectual empire waited for her footsteps. She recited softly the line that had started everything. "The Golden Age ended when curiosity dimmed." Then she added her own quiet promise. "But as long as curiosity survives, somewhere even in a small English village its light will rise again." Outside, a solitary lamp-post flickered to life, casting a gentle halo on the path. Miss Marple stood, picked up her cane, and closed the door behind her. The investigation had begun. Chapter 2. The Call from Oxford. The next morning, before the village postman had even begun his rounds, Miss Marple and Dr. Hale were already aboard the early train to Oxford. The countryside word passed in shades of winter green. But Miss Marple's mind was fixed on the manuscript resting safely in her handbag. Each passing mile brought her closer to answers she could feel but not yet articulate. Oxford emerged through the mist like a city carved from knowledge itself, spires rising through pale sunlight, bells murmuring faintly from ancient towers. Dr. Hale guided Miss Marple through cobbled paths until they reached the Oriental Studies Department, housed in a stately stone building with tall arched windows and a brass plate that gleamed. Center for Middle Eastern Manuscripts. Inside, the hall smelled of old parchment and polished wood. Scholars moved quietly between reading rooms, their whispers carrying the reverence of a sanctuary. Miss Marple felt the same subtle thrill she always did when entering a place where mysteries lived: libraries, archives, forgotten rooms. Dr. Hale stopped before a heavy oak door. "My mentor, Professor Leonard Arkwright, has been anxiously waiting," he said. "He's one of the few who has studied the circle of light." Miss Marple nodded. "Then he may be one of the few who understands what someone tried to hide." Professor Arkwright was tall, thin, head, and carried himself with an air of perpetual curiosity, like a man whose thoughts were always 2 steps ahead of his surroundings. When Dr. Hale introduced Miss Marple, the professor shook her hand with genuine warmth. "You've saved more than a manuscript, Miss Marple," he said. "You may have saved a window into one of the greatest intellectual eras in human history." Miss Marple smiled modestly. "I simply found what someone wished not to be found." "Precisely," the professor replied. "And that is often where the real mystery begins." He motioned them to a long table in his study, where several ancient documents lay spread under soft lamplight. Dr. Hale placed Miss Marple's manuscript among them, like a missing piece returning to its set. Professor Arkwright examined the torn page through a magnifying lens. The phrase, "The Golden Age ended when curiosity dimmed," is significant. It appears only in manuscripts associated with a small group within the House of Wisdom known as the Circle of Light. They believed knowledge should be preserved at all costs. Miss Marple leaned forward, so they anticipated their downfall. "Some certainly sensed it," the professor said, tapping the torn edge. "But the missing page, that page was rumored to contain the Circle's final assessment of why the Islamic Golden Age collapsed." "Meaning someone might not want that assessment known," Miss Marple murmured. "Exactly," Arkwright replied gravely. "And whoever tore it out knew precisely what they were doing." Miss Marple recognized the weight in his voice. History held secrets people still wished to conceal. Professor Arkwright invited them deeper into the archives, a vast room lined with towering shelves. The scent of centuries lingered in the air, and the dim, golden lighting made it feel as though time itself had paused respectfully at the threshold. He opened a locked drawer and retrieved a thin folder labeled Al-Holakot, Al-Noor, the Circle of Light. Inside were sketches of astronomical devices, fragments of philosophical writings, and faint diagrams resembling the same circular symbol Miss Marple had noticed on the manuscript. These were not merely scholars, the professor explained. They were observers of civilizations, analyzing not only scientific truths, but the conditions that allow knowledge to flourish. Dr. Hale added, "They saw the Golden Age as a delicate organism needing peace, curiosity, collaboration, and political support." Miss Marple traced the lines of one diagram thoughtfully. "It seems they studied the rise and fall of knowledge itself." "Yes," the professor said, "and that's why the missing page is so valuable. It may explain how such a mighty age of learning began, why it eventually withered." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Professor, you speak as if you believe the fall was not simply due to the Mongol attack," Arkwright folded his hands. Indeed, the fall began long before the attack. Baghdad's destruction was merely the final blow. Miss Marple felt the puzzle beginning to take shape. A fall not caused by one event, but by a slow, predictable unraveling one someone had tried to hide. The professor led them to the secure reading room, where only the rarest manuscripts were kept. The lights were low, the silence absolute. A single long table stood at the center, waiting like an altar. Dr. Hale carefully opened Miss Marple's manuscript again, and together the three of them searched for textual patterns that might hint at what the missing page once contained. Miss Marple noticed something peculiar. The way these chapters end. Each one concludes with a reflective note about knowledge. They are observations, lessons almost. Exactly, said Dr. Hale. They believed knowledge is a living force that must be nurtured. The professor highlighted another detail. Here, beneath Ibn Sina's commentary, a phrase appears repeatedly. Miss Marple read aloud. Where questioning thrives, civilization breathes. She sat back, the meaning crystallizing. The circle was warning future ages, she said slowly. Knowledge is not lost in a moment. It suffocates when people stop asking questions. Dr. Hale nodded, and whoever tore out that page understood how powerful such a message could be. The professor closed the manuscript gently. Miss Marple, the only way to reconstruct the missing page is to find its twin. These manuscripts were copied and stored in multiple centers of learning: Baghdad, Cairo, Samarkand, Córdoba. Miss Marple's eyes brightened with resolve. Then we must follow its trail. Baghdad is the most likely starting point, the professor said. Many fragments resurfaced there after the archives were restored, and with that, the next step of the investigation became unmistakably clear. As twilight settled over Oxford, the three sat in quiet reflection. Outside, the university bells tolled the late hour. Miss Marple looked out the window toward the medieval rooftops, imagining distant cities whose shadows still held voices from 1,000 years ago. The professor broke the silence. Miss Marple, if you're willing, I'd like to send you to Baghdad under the department's sponsorship. This manuscript belongs to the world, and you may be the only one who can uncover its truth. Miss Marple hesitated only long enough to sip her tea. I have learned over the years, she said gently, that truth rarely reveals itself to those who sit still. If the answers lie in Baghdad, then that is where I must go. Dr. Hale beamed. I'll accompany you, of course. Miss Marple nodded graciously. She felt an old, familiar spark, the one that always lit when a case required both courage and quiet observation. As they prepared to leave, Professor Arkwright added one final thought. Remember, Miss Marple, the Golden Age was built by people who believed knowledge belonged to everyone. Protect that belief, and you protect their legacy. Miss Marple touched the manuscript one last time before placing it back in her bag. The circle of light may have dimmed, she said softly, but perhaps their message has not yet been extinguished. With steady steps, she and Dr. Hale walked out into the cool Oxford night, unaware that the true mystery, the one buried beneath centuries of dust and silence, was only just beginning. Chapter 3: Journey to Baghdad, the City of Learning. 2 days later, Miss Marple found herself seated beside Dr. Hale aboard a morning flight to Baghdad. The hum of the engines blended with the soft murmurs of passengers, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from the present. She held the manuscript carefully in her lap, protected inside a padded leather case Professor Arkwright had provided. As the plane ascended through layers of cloud, she gazed out over the brightening sky. Somewhere below them lay centuries of history routes, once travelled by scholars, traders, astronomers, and physicians who crossed continents to share knowledge. Dr. Hale leaned toward her. "Are you nervous, Miss Marple?" "Not nervous," she replied, her eyes still on the horizon, "merely thoughtful. So many civilizations rise with promise and fall with forgetfulness. I wonder which path we follow now." Dr. Hale smiled faintly. The Circle of Light would have loved that question. Miss Marple touched the manuscript lightly. "I suspect they asked it themselves." Hours later, the aircraft descended over the broad, winding waters of the Tigris River. Baghdad below shimmered under the afternoon sun, immense tapestry of old and new, ancient memory and modern striving. Miss Marple felt a tremor of quiet reverence. This, she whispered, was once the brightest lamp of human knowledge. Baghdad greeted them with warm winds carrying the scent of distant spices and sun-baked stone. A local liaison, arranged by Professor Arkwright, met them. Mr. Yusuf Rahmani, a calm, scholarly man with keen eyes and a gentle voice. "Welcome to Baghdad," he said, bowing slightly. "I have been briefed on your mission. You seek the lost traces of the House of Wisdom." Miss Marple returned his greeting warmly. "We seek the truth behind what it once protected." He led them into the old quarter, where narrow streets twisted like threads of a woven carpet. Wooden balconies leaned forward as if listening. Shops displayed brass lamps, hand-woven rugs, and stacks of old books whose pages seemed to whisper stories from forgotten centuries. Yusuf pointed ahead. "The House of Wisdom once stood near here. Nothing remains of its structure, but its memory is everywhere, in stories, in manuscripts, in the way scholars still work." Miss Marple's gaze softened as she observed the old walls, the archways, the faint silhouettes of a past era. "In England," she said, "history lives in books. Here it seems to live in the air." Dr. Hale agreed. The Abbasid era transformed Baghdad into the world's intellectual heart. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, everything flourished here. Miss Marple paused before a bookseller's stall. A worn manuscript, its edges frayed, lay open on a faded cloth. "What ended such brilliance?" she asked quietly. Yusuf looked at her with deep respect. "That is what we hope you will help us understand." Yusuf guided them to a modest yet dignified building, restored hall where modern scholars met to study surviving fragments of Abbasid history. Its interior was cool, with walls lined in shelves of manuscripts, carefully copied texts, and recovered pages rescued from private collections. A small group of researchers greeted them warmly. When Yusuf introduced Miss Marple, the scholars regarded her with respectful curiosity. "This manuscript," she began, unfolding the padded case, "contains symbols and notes believed to be from the Circle of Light. And one page is missing, the page that explains the fall of the Golden Age." A hushed silence filled the room. One of the senior scholars, Professor Najida Abbas, examined the manuscript with gentle hands. "This script," she said in awe, "is identical to fragments we found near Mosul. They were written by a group of scholars deeply concerned with the preservation of knowledge." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "So you have seen similar writings?" "Yes," Nadira replied, "but never a complete manuscript. Many fragments were scattered during invasions, sold privately, or hidden to protect them." Dr. Hale stepped forward. "Professor, the missing page, could it exist elsewhere?" "It is very likely," she said. "The Circle of Light often kept duplicate copies. Some ended up in Cairo, others in Samarkand, a few in Córdoba." Miss Marple absorbed every word, her mind stitching threads together. "What," she asked gently, "do these fragments tell us about how the Golden Age began?" Nadira gestured for them to sit. "Then listen," she said, opening a folder of preserved texts. It began with openness. The scholars gathered around a large wooden table as Nadira read from a delicate parchment illuminated under soft yellow light. During the early Abbasid period, she explained, the caliphs believed knowledge was a divine gift. They welcomed scholars of every background, Persian, Greek, Indian, Arab, Christian, Jewish, to share ideas. Yusuf added, science became a universal language. Dr. Hale nodded. The translation movement began. Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, Persian astronomy, they were all brought together. Miss Marple listened intently. And so, Nadira continued, Baghdad became the world's greatest center of learning. House of Wisdom was more than a library, it was a university, a research laboratory, an observatory, a translation institute. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly, imagining it. Scholars debating passionately under lamplight. Mathematicians discovering new equations. Physicians discussing treatments and surgical techniques. Astronomers charting the heavens with astonishing accuracy. And yet, she said softly, such brilliance must have required something more than mere scholarly talent. It did, Nadira replied. It required curiosity without fear. That phrase echoed in Miss Marple's memory. Then the circle of light was right, she murmured. Curiosity was the engine of the Golden Age. Another scholar, a young man named Omar, stepped forward holding a small scroll. Miss Marple, he said, this fragment may interest you. It mentions the circle directly. She took it carefully. Inside was a line written in fluid Arabic script, translated below. Knowledge rises when questions rise. It falls when questions fall. The truth felt simple, yet immense. Then the rise, Miss Marple whispered, was inevitable. As long as questions were asked. The room fell still. But, she added quietly, what caused the questions to stop? As dusk settled over Baghdad, turning the windows amber, the scholars invited Miss Marple and Dr. Hale to join them for tea. The fragrance of mint filled the hall, and the warmth seemed to draw thoughts together like threads of an intricate tapestry. Miss Marple sat quietly, letting the scholar's words settle in her mind. A civilization powered by curiosity, a network of brilliant minds working without borders, an age where ideas flowed freely, and a group, the circle of light watching over it all. Dr. Hale glanced at her. You're thinking of the missing page. I am, she replied, and of whoever tore it out. Someone wanted to conceal not only how the Golden Age ended, but perhaps also why it mattered so deeply. Yusuf nodded thoughtfully. Then our next step is clear. You must continue the circle's trail. Where does it lead? Miss Marple asked. Professor Nadira smiled softly. To Cairo, she said. Many of the House of Wisdom's manuscripts were rescued and taken there. If a duplicate of your missing page exists, Cairo is the place where it might be found. Miss Marple's eyes shone with resolve. Then Cairo it shall be. She rose, cane in hand, and looked once more at the manuscript laid before Hert's pages, shimmering under lamplight like echoes from an age of brilliance. The Golden Age began with openness, she said gently, and perhaps its secret end lies where openness once flourished. As they left the hall, the warm night wind carrying the scent of spices, Miss Marple felt the unmistakable pull of history guiding her onward. A mystery older than any she had solved was beginning to reveal its shape one clue at a time. Chapter 4. The House of Wisdom and the Translation Movement. The next morning broke with a golden shimmer over Baghdad, the kind of quiet radiance that softens the edges of ancient stone and makes the city feel closer to its past than its present. Miss Marple, Dr. Hale, and Yusuf set out early toward the site where the original Beit ol-Hikmo, the House of Wisdom, once stood. Though no physical structure survived, Yusuf explained, historians had reconstructed its approximate location. Today, a modest courtyard and memorial plaque marked the place where the world's greatest minds once gathered under caliphal patronage, as they walked through gently winding streets. Miss Marple paid close attention to the conversations she overheard: shopkeepers haggling, schoolchildren reciting lessons, elders speaking of memories passed down through generations. Baghdad might have changed, but its Salit's love of knowledge still breathed in every corner. When they reached the courtyard, Miss Marple's steps slowed. She removed her hat reverently, sensing the gravity of the place. "This is where they translated the world," Yusuf whispered. Miss Marple felt a wave of quiet awe. "And where they illuminated it," she replied. The memorial stone bore a simple inscription: "In honor of those who sought knowledge for all humankind." Something about that line stirred a memory of the torn manuscript page. Knowledge for all humankind. That must have been the mission of the Circle of Light. The courtyard felt like the echo of a vanished brilliance, still warm, still alive, still waiting to be understood. Yusuf guided them into a small museum beside the courtyard, where preserved texts, replica instruments, and reconstructed workrooms painted a vivid picture of what the House of Wisdom had been. This was not simply a library, Yusuf explained. It was a living network. Scholars debated philosophy, medicine, mathematics. Translators worked tirelessly to bring knowledge from every corner of the world into Arabic. Miss Marple studied the displays carefully. One depicted a long wooden table where translators once sat shoulder to shoulder: Greek scribes, Persian mathematicians, Indian astronomers, Arab philosophers. They translated, compared, debated, and refined ideas until they blossomed into entirely new branches of science. Dr. Hale pointed to a map. The Caliph sent diplomats and scholars abroad to acquire texts: Greek manuscripts from Byzantine libraries, Sanskrit works on astronomy and medicine, Persian treatises on philosophy. And they brought them all here, Miss Marple murmured, to share what humanity had learned rather than hoard it. Yusuf nodded. That was the genius of the Abbasids. They understood that knowledge grows when shared. Miss Marple paused at a glass case holding an astrolabe, its brass rings intricately engraved. She imagined a scholar from centuries earlier calibrating it under lamplight, mapping the skies with exactness and wonder. The translation movement, Dr. Hale continued, didn't merely preserve older works, it transformed them. Scholars here corrected errors, introduced new theories, and built original research atop the foundations of earlier civilizations. Miss Marple's gaze turned thoughtful. It began with translation, she said, but it became something far greater. Yes, Yusuf agreed. It became creation. As they moved deeper into the museum, Miss Marple noticed familiar symbols carved into a stone tablet: overlapping circles, rays extending outward like threads of enlightenment. "The Circle of Light," she breathed. Yusuf smiled faintly. "Ah, you have a sharp eye, Miss Marple. Most visitors pass by without noticing." He led them to a private display, accessible only through a curator's key. Inside was a collection of rare documents attributed to or referencing the secretive scholarly society. These scholars, Yusuf explained, were more than participants in the Golden Age. They were its guardians. Their mission was not only to expand knowledge, but to protect the conditions that made knowledge flourish. Miss Marple studied a parchment fragment. This one mentions how the House of Wisdom frequently faced threats: political, religious, financial, and how the circle worked behind the scenes to preserve manuscripts, mentor new scholars, and ensure intellectual freedom. Miss Marple's fingers hovered over the glass, covering the fragment. Then they might also have seen the earliest signs of decline. Yusuf nodded gravely. Indeed, some circle writings indicate deep concern that the Golden Age could not last forever. And someone, Miss Marple added, did not want future generations to know why. Her hand moved instinctively to her handbag, where the torn manuscript rested. All the clues pointed in one direction. The missing page did not merely recount historical events, it revealed a warning. Miss Marple found herself seated at a quiet bench within the museum courtyard, shaded by an olive tree whose branches whispered with the desert wind. She opened the manuscript and laid it across her lap as Dr. Hale and Yusuf reviewed museum notes nearby. She reread the passages, tracing the insights of scholars who had lived more than 1,000 years before her. Their voices spoke across time with remarkable clarity. Knowledge rises on collaboration. Fear is the enemy of learning. Curiosity leads. Power must follow. When rulers turn inward, knowledge turns silent. Miss Marple closed her eyes, imagining those scholars sitting in this very place, observing the world with keen intelligence and recognizing both the potential and peril of their age. She opened her eyes again and whispered, "The Golden Age began when questions were allowed to breathe." This was the essence she had been searching for. The translation movement wasn't simply academic, it was an act of cultural courage, a decision to open doors rather than close them. Dr. Hale joined her. "You've found something, haven't you?" "Only the beginning," Miss Marple replied. "This age rose because people sought truth more than they sought certainty. They welcomed foreign ideas, challenged old assumptions, invited debate rather than avoided it." She touched the manuscript, and such openness, such humility must have been rare indeed. Yusuf approached them. "And fragile," he said gently, "very fragile." Miss Marple looked up at the sky, bright and boundless, and yet it lasted centuries. "For now," Yusuf said, "your next step is to follow where the manuscripts traveled. Cairo holds many treasures rescued from Baghdad." Miss Marple smiled. "I believe Cairo holds the next missing piece." That evening, as they walked back through the old quarter, lanterns flickering to life along narrow streets, Miss Marple felt a deepening sense of purpose. The air was warm, alive with history, and she sensed the past brushing close enough to touch. In a quiet tea house overlooking the river, they discussed their next move. Dr. Hale unfolded a map. "We fly to Cairo tomorrow. The Dar al-Kutub archives contain manuscripts saved from Baghdad before the Mongol invasion. Some may be linked to the circle." Yusuf added, "I'll arrange your passage. Cairo is a city where knowledge breathes in labyrinths." Miss Marple sipped her tea slowly, her mind assembling patterns like pieces of a puzzle. "The Islamic Golden Age did not begin by accident," she said. "It began because rulers invited knowledge, scholars protected it, and cultures shared it freely." Dr. Hale nodded in admiration. "And now, Miss Marple, you're retracing that journey." She smiled faintly. "Someone must." As they stepped back into the lantern-lit streets, Miss Marple glanced once more at the Baghdad night, the same sky that once guided mathematicians, astronomers, poets, and physicians. "Cairo," she whispered, "let us see what secrets you still keep." The path forward was clear, the mystery deepening. The Golden Age had begun with a bold decision to bring the world's knowledge together. Now Miss Marple would follow the path of that knowledge until she found the truth someone had tried to erase. Chapter 5. The Minds Who Built the Golden Age. Cairo greeted Miss Marple and Dr. Hale with an overwhelming tapestry of sound, color, and movement. The city spilled out beneath the bright Egyptian sun like an ancient mosaic streets, alive with vendors calling out prices, children weaving between crowds, the distant hum of car horns blending with the faint call to prayer. Their local host, Professor Samira El-Haddad from Cairo University, met them near the airport with the grace of someone accustomed to bridging world's modern academia and ancient scholarship. "Welcome," she said warmly. "Cairo is a place where history does not sleep. It whispers from every corner." Miss Marple smiled. "Then I hope it will whisper to us today." As the car made its way through Cairo's bustling avenues, Dr. Hale looked out in fascination. "This city," he murmured, "was once another beacon of learning during the Golden Age." Professor Samira nodded, "And much of Baghdad's knowledge survived here. Many scholars fled to Egypt as political tensions rose in the east, preserving priceless manuscripts." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Then Cairo may hold traces of the Circle of Light." "More than traces, I believe," Samira replied. "You may find their fingerprints on the very foundations of our academic heritage." The car turned toward the Nile, its shimmering water reflecting the vast sky. Miss Marple gazed at the river thoughtfully. "Baghdad showed us how the Golden Age began," she said. "Now Cairo may show us who built it." Dar al-Kutub, the Egyptian National Library and Archives, rose before them like a monumental guardian of memory. Inside, rows upon rows of manuscripts extended farther than the eye could see thousands of years of human thought bound in linen, leather, and paper. Samira led them into a secure research chamber where rare texts were preserved under controlled lighting. A large table was cleared for them, and white cotton gloves were provided. "We will begin," Samira said, "with the scholars whose discoveries shaped the Golden Age. Their manuscripts often contain personal reflections, marginal notes, and philosophical commentaries that may connect to your missing page." Miss Marple nodded appreciatively. "Let us meet the minds behind the light." Samira carefully placed the first manuscript before them. "This," she said, "is attributed to Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra." Miss Marple leaned in, observing the elegant Arabic numerals alongside geometric diagrams. Dr. Hale whispered, "Algebra germinated here. The foundations of modern mathematics, finance, engineering, even computing." Samira pointed to a faint marginal note. "See here," it reads, "where the unknown is invited, progress follows." Miss Marple's eyes warmed with understanding. So he believed curiosity was not merely helpful, but necessary. "Precisely," Samira said. "Al-Khwarizmi was driven by an insatiable desire to solve what others considered impossible." Next came a manuscript from Ibn al-Haytham, pioneer of experimental science. His diagrams of light rays and lenses were astonishingly precise. He was the first, Samira explained, to insist that scientific claims be tested through controlled experiments. He believed truth required proof. Miss Marple touched the glass gently. "And so the light of reason began with literal light." Samira smiled. "Beautifully put." The next manuscript belonged to Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna. His medical writings were so advanced they remained standard for centuries. Miss Marple read a translated margin note aloud. "Observe the patient, not the story you expect." "A timeless lesson," she murmured. Samira nodded. Ibn Sina believed knowledge demanded humility. A scholar must be willing to change his mind. And humility, Miss Marple said softly, is always the rarest virtue. As the afternoon sun mellowed into warm amber hues through the library's high windows, Samira brought out another set of manuscripts, these from Al-Razi, al-Biruni, and lesser-known scholars whose contributions had shaped entire fields. Al-Razi's writings astonished Miss Marple. He differentiated smallpox and measles, Dr. Hale explained. He emphasized cleanliness, ethical treatment, and evidence-based medicine. Miss Marple read another margin note. Ask what heals, not what tradition demands. That, she said thoughtfully, sounds almost rebellious. It was, Samira replied. Many Golden Age scholars challenged established beliefs. Next came Al-Biruni, a polymath, whose mastery seemed almost unreal. Astronomy, geography, mathematics, comparative religion, geology, he studied everything. His manuscript contained a striking line. All knowledge is a map of the world. Draw it carefully. Miss Marple leaned back, absorbing the weight of his words. These scholars were not merely thinkers, they were cartographers of the human mind. Dr. Hale nodded, and they built on each other's ideas. Al-Khwarizmi influenced later mathematicians, who influenced astronomers, who influenced physicists. Samira gestured to the manuscripts around them. The Golden Age was a web, the strands woven by countless hands. That is why it flourished. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. A web, and also a flame. Knowledge passed from one mind to another, like fire kindled from a single lamp. Yes, Samira said with reverence, a fire bright enough to light cities. Miss Marple's thoughts turned toward the missing page again. What could extinguish such a flame? She wondered aloud. Samira exchanged a knowing look with Dr. Hale. That, she said gently, is the question the Circle of Light sought to answer. Late in the afternoon, Samira produced a manuscript that had been recovered from an old Cairo mosque library. Its cover was unremarkable, but the first page displayed a symbol Miss Marple instantly recognized. The overlapping circles, the rays like a sun bursting from the page. The emblem of the Circle of Light. Miss Marple leaned over it, breath-catching. This is the same symbol from our manuscript. Samira nodded. I thought you would notice. Inside were reflections written by anonymous scholars. They were philosophical, almost poetic meditations on the conditions that sustain intellectual life. Miss Marple read a passage aloud. Knowledge grows where people disagree honorably. Knowledge dies where agreement is forced. Dr. Hale exhaled slowly. They understood freedom of thought better than most societies today. Another line read, beware the time when rulers fear questions. That is the moment civilizations turn inward. Miss Marple felt a quiet tremor of recognition. The seeds of decline, she whispered, begin long before the fall. Samira added softly, the Circle of Light recorded early warning signs. Their writings were scattered to protect them. Miss Marple lifted her gaze, and the missing page must have contained their final warning. Evening settled gently over Cairo, and the golden light of sunset filled the reading room. Miss Marple, Dr. Hale, and Samira sat quietly, each absorbed in contemplation. The manuscripts before them seemed luminous, as though the minds behind them still glowed through ink and parchment. Miss Marple broke the silence. The Islamic Golden Age was built by extraordinary mind scientists, philosophers, physicians, mathematicians. But more importantly, it was built by a culture that allowed these minds to flourish. Samira nodded deeply. A culture that welcomed diversity, encouraged debate, funded scholarship, and admired curiosity. Dr. Hale folded his hands, and the Circle of Light was the conscience of that culture. Miss Marple's expression grew solemn, and someone, centuries later, tore out the page that explains how it ended. Someone feared the truth. Samira leaned forward. We must go to the one place where the Circle's final writings may survive Samarkand. Scholars fleeing both Baghdad and Cairo carried fragments along the Silk Road. Some were preserved in libraries there. Miss Marple straightened, her resolve firm as ever. Then Samarkand is our next destination. Dr. Hale smiled. Another chapter begins. Miss Marple closed the manuscript gently, as though tucking in a sleeping child. The minds who built the Golden Age, she said softly, built more than knowledge. They built a legacy, and we owe it to them to uncover the truth they preserved. As they stepped out into Cairo's moonlit streets, the city glowing with ancient resilience, Miss Marple felt herself walking in the footsteps of scholars who had asked the same questions she now pursued. A journey through time, guided by curiosity, just as the circle of light intended. Chapter 6. Knowledge spreads across the world. The next leg of their journey carried Miss Marple, Dr. Hale, and Professor Samira from Cairo to the storied heart of Central Asia, Samarkand. The plane droned steadily above vast deserts, mountain ranges glinting with snow, and shifting sands that once bore the caravans of scholars and traders. Miss Marple gazed out the window, fascinated by the landscape. "It looks," she murmured, "like a world waiting to be mapped." Dr. Hale nodded. And many scholars from the Golden Age tried. The Silk Road was not only a trade route, was an intellectual highway. When the plane descended toward Samarkand, the city unfolded like a jeweler, panorama of blue-tiled domes, intricate minarets, and ancient structures shimmering under the late afternoon sun. "It feels," Miss Marple whispered, "as though time has preserved its own memory here." Samira smiled softly. Samarkand was once home to brilliant astronomers, mathematicians, and libraries that preserved the knowledge fleeing from Baghdad and Cairo. If the circle of light hid any texts, this is where traces would remain. As they stepped onto Samarkand's soil, Miss Marple sensed the quiet hum of centuries beneath her feet. This city had witnessed empires rise and fall, yet its libraries and observatories had kept their lamps burning. She felt closer than ever to the missing page. Their first destination was the legendary Ulugh Beg Observatory, built in the 15th century by a Timurid ruler passionate about science and mathematics. Though chronologically later than the Golden Age, the observatory had inherited and preserved much of the earlier scholarly tradition. The curved remains of a giant sextant rose from the ground like the fossilized ribs of a titanic creature. Carved stone steps led down into the ancient measuring chamber where astronomers once charted the heavens with uncanny precision. "This," Samira said, "is one of the finest examples of scientific continuity. Knowledge traveled here long before the Mongol invasions." Miss Marple ran her fingertips over the smooth stone rail. "Even after devastation," she said, "knowledge survived. It simply moved." Dr. Hale pointed to the walls, where reconstructed diagrams illustrated the observatory's original purpose. Ulugh Beg built star catalogues more accurate than any in Europe at the time. His influence came partly from the very scholars who fled Baghdad. Miss Marple lifted her head, studying the open sky framed by the observatory's stone arch. "It seems the Golden Age did not spread through conquest or force. It spread like light from one lamp to another." Samira nodded, "And each new city added a new lamp." Miss Marple opened her notebook. "So Baghdad began the light, Cairo sheltered it, and Samarkand carried it forward. But for how long?" Dr. Hale asked quietly. "That," Miss Marple said, closing the notebook, "is precisely what we must discover." Their next stop was the Institute of Oriental Manuscripts, preserved within the old city. The building's turquoise dome gleamed in the sun, and inside, shelves lined the walls in orderly rows. The scent of ink and parchment filled the air. A fragrance Miss Marple found deeply comforting. A senior librarian, Mr. Timur Beck, welcomed them with solemn respect. "We were informed of your interest in manuscripts associated with the House of Wisdom," he said. "You may find what you seek in our Central Asian archives." He led them into a temperature-controlled room containing manuscripts rescued across centuries. These texts traveled with scholars who fled political instability, invasions, or economic decline. The Golden Age may have dimmed in one region, but its ideas continued to migrate. Miss Marple found a manuscript bound in faded silk. It contained astronomical tables derived from Indian, Persian, and Greek sources. Evidence of knowledge blending seamlessly across cultures. Another scroll revealed early algebraic formulas, annotated in different ink by multiple scholars who had studied the same text over generations. Dr. Hale handled each document reverently. "It's remarkable," he said. "Knowledge wasn't just preserved, here it grew." Miss Marple paused at a parchment containing a curious marginal note. "Carry the flame where the winds are still." She felt a soft tremor of recognition. "This sounds like a phrase from the Circle of Light." Samira agreed. The circle may have influenced scholars traveling along the Silk Road. Their survival strategy was simple: take knowledge where it can breathe. Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And knowledge breathes wherever minds remain open." Mr. Timur led them to a small wooden chest, intricately carved and remarkably old. "This," he explained, "was discovered in Bukhara during a restoration project. Its contents have not been fully catalogued." He unlocked it carefully. Inside rested a bundle of fragile pages tied with a faded ribbon. Samira inhaled sharply. "These symbols, Dr. Hale, Miss Marple, look." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The overlapping circles, the radiating lines, the unmistakable emblem of the Circle of Light. Mr. Timur laid the pages gently on a velvet cloth. These fragments appeared to be philosophical reflections, perhaps from scholars connected to Baghdad before the fall. Miss Marple leaned in, scanning the translated notes beside the Arabic script. "Civilization stands strongest when built upon shared knowledge. Guard the exchange of ideas, for borders cannot protect wisdom. Knowledge is not a possession, it is a river." Miss Marple tapped one line thoughtfully. "This metaphor, a river, always moving, that explains how the Golden Age spread." Dr. Hale nodded. "And why it survived the decline of individual cities." Miss Marple noticed a final, partially faded passage. "The beginning of decline is not the enemy outside, but the stillness inside." She whispered the words aloud. "Stillness inside," meaning stagnation. Samira agreed. The circle believed that the end of curiosity, not war, was the first sign of decline. Dr. Hale added, "And that idea matches the torn page in our manuscript." Miss Marple pressed her lips together, but someone removed the full explanation. Why silence a warning that could help future generations? No one had an answer, but they all sensed they were close. That evening, they dined in a quiet courtyard beneath grapevines and lanterns. The air was cool, and the stars above Samarkand shimmered like ancient guides. Miss Marple sat with her notebook open, reviewing the day's discoveries. Baghdad birthed knowledge, she reflected. Cairo preserved it, Samarkand carried it. But where did it go next? Samira sipped her tea thoughtfully. During the later Golden Age, many translated manuscripts, carried by diplomats and scholars, reached Córdoba in Islamic Spain. There libraries and universities flourished. Some of the greatest works of the East circulated in the West. Dr. Hale added, Europe's later scientific revival was heavily influenced by Córdoba's scholars. Knowledge flowed westward like a tide. Miss Marple felt a familiar surge of clarity. Then Córdoba must hold the next piece of the puzzle. Samira nodded. And possibly a surviving copy of your missing page. Miss Marple closed her notebook and stood, gazing at the night sky. The Golden Age spread because people believed knowledge belonged to everyone. If we are to uncover its end, we must follow that belief along its final path. Dr. Hale smiled. To Spain, then. Miss Marple breathed softly, as though addressing the scholars who had walked this road before her. We will find your truth, she promised, even if it lies halfway across the world. The lanterns flickered in the courtyard, casting rings of warm light, a quiet echo of the circle of light itself. The journey continued. Chapter 7. The Shadow Appears. Politics and Fragmentation. Córdoba welcomed Miss Marple, Dr. Hale, and Professor Samira with the gentle warmth of Andalusian spring. Whitewashed houses lined narrow streets, their balconies heavy with crimson geraniums. The soft murmur of fountains echoed beneath the arches of old courtyards. This city, Samira whispered, was once the western mirror of Baghdad. Dr. Hale nodded. During its peak, Córdoba's libraries held hundreds of thousands of books. Scholars traveled from across Europe to learn here. Miss Marple gazed toward the great mosque cathedral, its layered history standing as a testament to centuries of cultural blending. In Samarkand, she said quietly, we saw how knowledge moved eastward. Here, I suspect we shall see how it moved west, and perhaps how it began to falter. Their host, Professor Emilio Vargas from the University of Córdoba, met them near the archive entrance. A thin, bright-eyed man with an energetic voice, he took Miss Marple's hand enthusiastically. I have been informed, he said, that you seek documents related to the decline of the Islamic Golden Age. You may find some answers here, but I warn you, the story grows darker. Miss Marple nodded steadily. I am prepared for truth in all its shades, Professor. He smiled. Then welcome to the last great light before Europe's dawn. Professor Vargas guided them into the Córdoba Manuscript Archive, a quiet and dignified space brimming with scrolls, codices, and bound works from the early medieval period. These texts, Vargas explained, survived wars, fires, and transitions of power. They contain not only science and philosophy, but also commentary about the political climate of the time. Miss Marple immediately sensed a shift. In Baghdad, Cairo, and Samarkand, she felt uplifted by the brilliance of knowledge. But here, among the preserved volumes, she sensed something heavier, like the final chapters of a long, magnificent story. Dr. Hale read aloud from one document. Andalusia, in its flourishing years, rivaled Baghdad in light, yet shadows grew at its edges. Samira examined another manuscript. Here, she said, a scholar writes of rising tensions between regional rulers, each demanding loyalty, each suspicious of others' influence. Professor Vargas nodded gravely. This was one of the first signs of fragmentation. As political unity weakened, so did scholarly collaboration. Miss Marple closed her eyes, recalling a line from the Circle of Light. Knowledge stands tallest when nations stand together. She looked at Vargas, and when they stopped standing together, he gestured sadly to the shelves. Knowledge becomes regional, then vulnerable, then forgotten. Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly around her cane. The shadow begins, she murmured, not with a single event, but with the quiet breaking of bonds. In a private archive room, Vargas brought out a folio containing translated letters exchanged between scholars of Córdoba and declining centers in the East. These, he explained, were written near the end of the Golden Age. They revealed deep anxieties among scholars. Miss Marple leaned in as he opened the first letter written by a scholar displaced from Baghdad. We once debated freely under patronage that valued science, but now rulers fear scholars. They ask for flattery, not truth. Dr. Hale exhaled slowly. That is identical to passages we saw in Samarkand. Samira turned to the next letter. Our libraries shrink, not from lack of knowledge, but from lack of peace. Every region guards its secrets. Every ruler guards his pride. Miss Marple felt a stillness inside her, chilling realization. The scholars saw it coming, she said. They recognized that knowledge cannot thrive where fear grows. Another letter confirmed her thought. The enemy outside concerns us less than the silence inside our own walls. She froze. That phrase, she whispered, we saw in Samarkand. It appears repeatedly in circle writings. Vargas nodded, because the circle of light had correspondence even in Córdoba. Their fears were shared across continents. Miss Marple understood now. This was not merely a historical decline. It was a collapse, observed and mourned by the greatest minds of the time. Political fragmentation, she said softly, and the erosion of intellectual freedom. The room felt suddenly colder. As the sun dipped outside, casting amber light across the archives, Professor Vargas brought out one final manuscript, this one written nearly a century after Córdoba's height. This, he said, shows the consequences of fragmentation. Miss Marple read a translated passage. Where once rulers financed scholars, now they finance wars. Where once libraries expanded, now they are taxed. Where once ideas moved freely across borders, now borders choke them. A heavy silence fell. Dr. Hale looked troubled. Lose patronage, lose scholarship. It's inevitable, Samira added. Many scholars began to leave. Some returned east. Others hid their works. Some disappeared entirely. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. The circle of light must have witnessed this unraveling firsthand. She glanced toward Vargas. Did Córdoba scholars write about the circle specifically? Vargas nodded slowly and retrieved another page. This, he said, is a commentary by a Córdoban philosopher referencing a coded message from the East. Miss Marple leaned forward. The circle warns. When nations look inward, wisdom cannot look outward. When rulers choose pride over learning, decline begins. When the people question less, the shadows lengthen. Miss Marple felt her heart tighten. The circle, she whispered, was trying to warn future civilizations. Dr. Hale placed a hand on the table, and someone wanted that warning hidden. Samira murmured, that missing page is more precious than we realized. It was no longer just a historical document. It was a messenger plea from a dying age of brilliance. Later that evening, they walked through Córdoba's old city. The streets were calm, lanterns glowing softly against the ancient stone. Yet Miss Marple sensed the echoes of what they had learned, the slow, painful fading of an age that once lit the world. As they crossed a quiet bridge over the Guadalquivir River, she spoke softly. Knowledge does not die in a single night. It dies when people stop defending it. Dr. Hale looked at her thoughtfully. Miss Marple, what do you think the missing page contains? She paused, her eyes reflecting the river's shimmering surface. I believe, she said slowly, it contains the circle's final diagnosis. Why the Golden Age truly ended, why it mattered, and perhaps a warning for future generations. Samira agreed. And Córdoba shows us part of that diagnosis. Fragmentation, silencing of scholars, loss of patronage. But there is still more, Miss Marple said. Something deeper, something the circle feared most. Vargas nodded. You must travel further. Toledo, Seville, and even manuscripts that made their way into Europe may hold remaining pieces. Miss Marple straightened her posture, resolve shining through her calm expression. Then we must continue, she said. The shadow that fell over the Golden Age is still not fully understood, but we will understand it. As they returned to their lodging for the night, Miss Marple looked up at the stars, the same stars once charted by astronomers of Baghdad, Samarkand, and Córdoba. Knowledge, she whispered, is a light that dims only when tended poorly. But even in the darkness, she believed, the circle of light still waited to be heard, and she would find their final message. Chapter 8. The Fall of Baghdad. The night the libraries burned. For days, Miss Marple had studied manuscripts, letters, and hidden warnings scattered across cities that once formed the backbone of the Islamic Golden Age. But now, at Professor Vargas's suggestion, she prepared to return mentally and intellectually to the moment where everything changed. The fall of Baghdad, Dr. Hale said quietly as they sat together in a Córdoba courtyard, was the moment the world shifted. Miss Marple nodded, and yet the fall itself was not sudden. The circle believed decline began long before the city's walls were breached. Samira placed a stack of translated chronicles before them. These accounts, she explained, describe what happened in 1258 when the Mongols reached Baghdad. But the deeper story lies between the lines. Miss Marple opened the first chronicle. Its words trembled with grief, even centuries later. The river Tigris ran black with ink, for the books of the House of Wisdom were thrown into its waters, and sank like fallen stars. Miss Marple paused, her breath catching softly. The burning of a library, she murmured, is not only the destruction of knowledge, it is the destruction of memory. Dr. Hale whispered, it was the end of an age. But Miss Marple gently shook her head. No, the end began before the fire. The fire simply revealed what had already been lost. The next chronicle described the Mongol approach, how city after city fell, how fear travelled faster than armies. Samira read aloud. The scholars sealed their works in boxes, hoping to hide them beneath the earth, but fear makes even the wise falter. Miss Marple considered this carefully. The scholars understood the danger, but their unity was gone. Political fragmentation had weakened the empire. Dr. Hale added, trade routes were disrupted. Patronage had dwindled. Many scholars had already fled or ceased their work. Miss Marple turned the page, revealing a haunting passage. We wrote letters seeking aid from neighboring rulers, but each guarded his own walls. We stood alone. That, Miss Marple whispered, is the true tragedy. Not that enemies came, but that friends did not. Samira nodded. Baghdad was once the intellectual heart of the world. Yet when danger approached, the arteries that connected it to other regions had already hardened. Another chronicle spoke of the caliphate's inner turmoil, court intrigues, financial mismanagement, a decline in scholarly funding. Miss Marple's eyes grew distant. Fear on the outside, she murmured, and silence on the inside. The circle saw it all. They read another line. The lamps of the House of Wisdom flickered. Long before the city fell, Miss Marple closed the book reverently. The scholars sensed the end. But what did they want us to learn from it? Professor Vargas brought out a particularly fragile manuscript, one describing the day the Mongols entered Baghdad. Read gently, he cautioned. The sorrow in this text is great. Miss Marple unfolded the page with delicate hands, and there, in stark, trembling script, she found first-hand testimony of the catastrophe. When the walls fell, the scholars stood unarmed. They offered knowledge instead of weapons. the invaders did not understand its worth. Dr. Hale bowed his head. Knowledge cannot negotiate with swords. Samira continued reading. They entered the house of wisdom. Books of astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and poetry were torn from shelves, thrown into the river, or used as footpaths across the mud. Miss Marple felt an ache deep within her chest, not simply sadness, but recognition of something profound. The destruction of knowledge, she said softly, is always personal. It is an attack on every human mind that contributed to it. Dr. Hale whispered. The river turned black with ink for weeks. Samira's voice was somber, and many scholars were killed or enslaved. Libraries, observatories, hospitals, everything that represented the Golden Age was annihilated. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. Yet even this, she said deliberately, was not the cause of decline. It was the culmination. She opened her eyes again, sharp as ever. The circle of light wrote warnings long before the invasion. They foresaw this ending not because they predicted the Mongols, but because they understood the fragility of a world that no longer valued curiosity. Professor Vargas produced one last document. This, he said, is believed to be the final letter sent by a circle member before the fall. Miss Marple unfolded it solemnly. The ink was faded, but readable. We have watched the lamps grow dim. Arguments replace inquiry. Pride replaces humility. Fear replaces wonder. And now the winds of war approach a house without its foundation. Dr. Hale swallowed. This is almost prophetic. Miss Marple nodded, her voice calm but heavy. The circle understood that civilizations do not fall when enemies attack. They fall when they stop being curious. Another line read, "Tell those who come after us, guard the freedom to question. For the moment, questions cease. The shadows grow." Samira pressed a hand to her lips. This must be what the missing page elaborates the circle's final analysis. Miss Marple studied the words intently. The missing page, she said slowly, was not torn away out of malice alone. It threatened someone, perhaps a later ruler, perhaps a later ideology. Someone feared this message that decline begins internally, not externally. Dr. Hale frowned. Someone who believed history should show a simple villain, not a complex truth. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, people prefer a dramatic fall, not a slow erosion of values. But the circle insisted that truth matters even when uncomfortable. That evening, Miss Marple walked alone along the Guadalquivir River, the moon shimmering across its gentle waters. Her cane tapped softly against the cobblestones, a quiet rhythm in the still night. She reflected on Baghdad's fate, not only its devastation, but the heartbreak of scholars who watched their life's work vanish. She whispered into the night, "How many worlds have we lost because we failed to protect curiosity?" Dr. Hale and Samira soon joined her, standing silently at her side. "Miss Marple," Samira said softly, "do you believe the circle's message still matters today?" Miss Marple turned to them, eyes shining with conviction. "It matters more than ever. The Golden Age fell because people stopped questioning, stopped sharing, stopped valuing truth. These are dangers that return in every era, including our own." Dr. Hale nodded. "So, our next step." Miss Marple looked toward the stars, the same stars once charted by Baghdad's astronomers. "Now," she said, "we must find the missing page. We have seen the rise. We have witnessed the fall. But the circle's final message remains incomplete." She lifted her chin, resolute. "And I believe," she said firmly, "that the missing page survived somewhere. The circle was too careful, too wise, to let it vanish entirely." Samira smiled softly. Then the journey continues. Miss Marple sighed, but it was a hopeful sigh, the sigh of a detective nearing the heart of a mystery. "We will uncover the truth," she murmured, "for the sake of the scholars who wrote it, and for the world that still needs it." The river flowed beside them, quiet and steady like knowledge itself, surviving even after destruction. Chapter 9. The Final Clue. Why the Golden Age truly ended. After weeks of travel through the cities that once illuminated the world, Baghdad, Cairo, Samarkand, Córdoba, Miss Marple, Dr. Haley, and Samira finally returned to Oxford. Their flight landed just after dawn. Mist gathered over the ancient spires, making the university appear dreamlike, suspended between centuries. Professor Arkwright met them outside the Oriental Studies department, worry etched across his features. "You have seen much," he said quietly, "more, perhaps, than any of us expected." Miss Marple nodded. "And yet the most important piece remains missing." Inside the study, where their journey had first begun, they laid out every manuscript, fragment, and translated note they had collected across continents. Maps were pinned along the walls, Baghdad's scholarly districts, Cairo's old libraries, Samarkand's observatory, Córdoba's archives. The desk was a mosaic of centuries-old ink. Dr. Hale exhaled slowly. "We traced the rise. We witnessed the decline. But the circle's final truth, the core of the missing pages, still incomplete." Arkwright poured tea for everyone with trembling hands. "My dear Miss Marple, have you formed a theory?" Miss Marple took the cup gently but did not sip. Her gaze settled on the overlapping circles drawn centuries ago by the circle of light. "The Golden Age did not end because a foreign enemy attacked," she said softly. "It ended because the world failed to protect what built it." Samira leaned forward. "You believe the decline began internally?" Miss Marple nodded. "And the missing page will confirm this. But to reconstruct it, we must assemble what each city taught us." She placed her hand atop the manuscripts. "Let us begin." Professor Arkwright opened a notebook and divided a blank page into columns. "Baghdad," he wrote, in the first column, "Cairo, Samarkand, Córdoba." Miss Marple approached the desk with her usual calm precision. "From Baghdad," she said, "we learned that the Golden Age rose on curiosity, collaboration, and generous patronage. But we also learned the early signs of fragmentation, political disputes, waning interest in scholarship, and rising fear." She placed Baghdad's fragments into the first column. "From Cairo," she continued, "we saw how knowledge adapted and survived, but also how scholars lamented the slowing of debate and the tightening of intellectual freedom." Another set of manuscripts filled the second column. "From Samarkand," she said, "we learned that knowledge can travel, but only when there are open minds to receive it." Their fragments warned of stagnation, the stillness inside. The third column grew, filled with poetic warnings. "From Córdoba," she finished, "we learned that patronage dwindled, scholars fled, borders closed, and rulers feared questions." Professor Arkwright stepped back, astonished. "You've created a timeline of warning signs." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No, Professor, the circle created it. We're simply reading it." Samira looked over the notes. "So the missing page likely summarized these conditions." "Not summarized," Miss Marple corrected softly, warned. She pointed to a line from Samarkand. "The beginning of decline is not the enemy outside, but the stillness inside." Then to Córdoba. "When nations look inward, wisdom cannot look outward." Then to Baghdad. Curiosity dimmed before the lamps went out. A hush fell over the room. Dr. Hale whispered, "Miss Marple." The circle of light predicted the fall. Decades before it happened? Yes, she said. And they wrote their diagnosis. That is what the missing page contains. Not a record of events, but a message to the future. Arkwright murmured. Then why was it torn away? Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Because the truth is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable truths are easily silenced. They worked for hours, comparing phrasing styles, recurring metaphors, themes, and linguistic choices of the circle's writings. Samira transcribed passages, while Dr. Hale analyzed patterns in how warnings were structured. Miss Marple remained quiet most of the time, studying, absorbing, letting threads align in her mind the way they always did in her most difficult cases. Finally, she stood, leaning lightly on her cane. "Consider the circle's approach," she said. "Their messages always contained three elements: diagnosis, cause, and counsel." Dr. Hale nodded. "Every fragment we found follows that structure. So the missing page," Miss Marple said, "must include these three." She picked up her notebook and wrote, 1. Diagnosis, the dimming of curiosity. 2. Cause, the rise of fear, pride, and fragmentation. 3. Counsel, a warning to future civilizations. Samira's eyes widened. Yes, that matches everything we've seen. Miss Marple then pieced together phrases drawn from manuscripts across continents. "Listen," she said gently, reading aloud the reconstruction. "Know that the Golden Age ended not by the sword, but when minds ceased to question, when rulers sought praise over truth, when scholars feared to disagree, when borders closed and pride opened. The lamp dimmed long before the night arrived." Arkwright inhaled sharply. "My word," Miss Marple continued. "Guard the freedom to ask, for civilizations fall when curiosity falls. And remember, the enemy outside conquers only after the spirit within has surrendered." Samira whispered, "It sounds exactly like the circle's voice." Dr. Hale swallowed. "That's it. That's the missing page." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "It is what the missing page likely said. The true page still exists somewhere." But the reconstructed message settled into the room like truth reclaimed. Silence lingered for several moments before Professor Arkwright spoke. "If this was the circle's warning," he said, "it would have been controversial. Rulers who wanted simple narratives' heroic rises and dramatic falls would reject such complexity." Samira added, "And future historians, influenced by political climates, could have removed it to shape convenient stories." Dr. Hale frowned. "Miss Marple, do you think someone in more recent centuries tore it out?" Miss Marple considered this carefully. "The tear is clean," she said. "Professional, likely from someone who valued the manuscript, yet feared its content. Perhaps a collector who wanted the Golden Age remembered as a victim of invasion, not of internal decline." Arkwright looked troubled. So the truth was silenced. Miss Marple touched the reconstructed page. "Truth can be torn from a book," she said softly, "but not from history. It always finds its way back." She then added a chilling thought. The circle of light tried to warn future generations, and someone tried to stop that warning from being heard. Dr. Hale glanced at her. "Do you believe the original page still exists?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "And we must find it." Evening settled over Oxford, casting warm amber glows through the old windows. Their table, cluttered with centuries of knowledge, felt like the beating heart of civilizations past. Miss Marple stared thoughtfully at the reconstructed text. "It explains everything," she said softly. "Why the Golden Age began, why it flourished, why it declined, and why it fell." Dr. Hale nodded. "And yet, the work is not complete. Samira smiled gently. There remains one more chapter. Professor Arkwright stepped forward. Miss Marple, where do you believe the missing page truly is? She looked at the manuscripts, the maps, the symbols of the circle of light, then lifted her gaze with calm certainty. The missing page, she said, is wherever the circle believed knowledge would be safest. Dr. Hale blinked. Meaning, Miss Marple whispered, that the page was not lost by accident. It was hidden intentionally. Samira exhaled softly. And now we must discover where they hid it. Miss Marple nodded. The circle of light left us enough clues to follow their trail, and in chapter 10 we will find their final message. They stood together, united by purpose. Outside, Oxford's ancient bells began to chime, the same bells that had rung through wars, plagues, discoveries, and revolutions. Knowledge survives, Miss Marple said quietly, because someone chooses to protect it. And she intended to protect it now. Chapter 10, Miss Marple's Final Report, The Light That Never Dies. Oxford awoke under a curtain of soft morning rain, mist clinging to the rooftops like a veil over centuries of memory. Inside Professor Arkwright's office, Miss Marple sat quietly, her cane resting against the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Before her lay the reconstructed message of the circle of light lines of wisdom pieced together from Baghdad, Cairo, Samarkand, and Córdoba. She had traveled across continents, followed the shadows and lights of an age long past, and assembled the truth the circle had fought to preserve. Yet one question remained. Where had the original missing page gone? Dr. Hale paced near the window, restless with anticipation. Miss Marple, you've reconstructed the message perfectly, but how can we find the actual page? It might have disappeared centuries ago. Miss Marple smiled faintly. My dear Dr. Hale, pages may wander, but they rarely vanish without trace, especially when hidden by those who valued knowledge above life itself. She tapped the reconstructed message lightly. The circle of light left a pattern in their writing, a pattern not only of ideas, but of places. Professor Arkwright leaned in. You believe the hiding place is encoded in their philosophy? Yes, Miss Marple replied, and they repeated the clues across every manuscript. The answer has been before us from the beginning. Samira whispered, a place where knowledge is safe. Miss Marple nodded. A place not tied to empire, not tied to politics, not tied to power. She paused, letting the idea settle. A place where knowledge belongs to everyone. Arkwright's eyes widened. Miss Marple, you don't mean. But she simply smiled. Within the next hour, they walked through the drizzle toward the Bodleian Library, one of the oldest repositories of knowledge in the world. Rain beaded on Miss Marple's coat, and the stone yard echoed softly with each tap of her cane. Dr. Hale frowned, but the Bodleian wasn't founded until centuries after the Golden Age. How could the missing page be here? Miss Marple's voice was gentle, patient. The circle of light believed in knowledge as a universal heritage. They ensured their writings traveled. You saw this yourself. X-Team moved from Baghdad to Cairo, from Cairo to Samarkand, from Samarkand to Córdoba, and from Córdoba, many manuscripts traveled to Europe through scholarly exchanges, collectors, or translations. Samira nodded slowly. Some Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars in Spain shared texts with early European libraries, and English scholars visited Iberia often during the medieval and early Renaissance periods. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. So, if the circle wished their final warning to survive beyond empire, beyond borders, were better than a library that vowed never to destroy a book. Arkwright looked around the Bodleian's ancient walls. My goodness, it is possible. They entered the vast structure, its vaulted ceilings rising like silent cathedrals to knowledge. The scent of leather, aged ink, and quiet scholarship wrapped around them like a warm cloak. Miss Marple approached a reference desk, her voice polite but firm. We would like access to manuscripts acquired from Iberia in the late medieval period, particularly those with Arabic or bilingual annotations. The librarian raised an eyebrow. A challenging request, but not impossible. This way. As they were guided into the restricted reading room, Dr. Hale whispered, Miss Marple, do you truly believe the missing page is here? She smiled. I believe the Circle of Light had more foresight than most of us give them credit for. Hours passed as they sifted through manuscripts, some written on thin parchment, others on brittle paper, some bound in leather cracked like desert soil. Arabic marginalia appeared frequently, Spanish glosses here and there, Latin translations layered above them like historical footprints. Most were fascinating but irrelevant, until Samira gasped, Miss Marple, look. She held a slim manuscript bound in dark leather. Its pages were uneven, as though repaired many times, but the first page bore a familiar emblem. The overlapping circles, the radiating lines, the unmistakable seal of the Circle of Light. Dr. Hale's voice shook. It can't be here. Miss Marple took the manuscript with steady hands, opening it carefully. The pages were old but intact. On the fifth leaf, a corner seemed slightly misaligned as, though inserted separately. She smiled softly. Oh, how clever they were. With infinite delicacy, she lifted the loose leaf. The room fell silent. There it was, the missing page. The original warning of the Circle of Light, written in graceful Arabic script, with faded red marginal notes. It read, to those who inherit our knowledge, understand that our age did not fall in a single blow, but in the quiet weakening of the mind. Miss Marple continued in a hushed, reverent voice. Curiosity dimmed when fear grew, and fear grew when pride ruled. Rulers who silenced debate, and scholars who forgot humility, together forged our decline. Dr. Hale swallowed hard. The final paragraph glowed with breathtaking clarity. Remember this, above all else, the destruction of our libraries was but the final shadow. The true night fell when we stopped questioning. Miss Marple's hands trembled not with age, but with awe. They left it here, she whispered. They hid it where knowledge endured, and they trusted that someday someone would understand. That evening, back in Professor Arkwright's study, Miss Marple carefully composed her final report, a summary of her journey, the Circle's message, and the lessons history left behind. Her writing was steady, elegant, precise. She wrote, the Islamic Golden Age rose when minds were open. It grew when cultures embraced one another. It flourished when curiosity was free. It weakened when fear replaced inquiry. It declined when pride replaced humility. And it fell when the world stopped asking questions. She paused, dipping her pen lightly. Knowledge is not lost through conquest, but through indifference. The enemy outside conquers, only when the spirit within falters. Dr. Hale read over her shoulder, breath held. Miss Marple, this might be the most important document of our time. But she simply smiled. I only wrote what wiser souls taught me. Samira placed a gentle hand on Miss Marple's arm. You have honored them well. The next morning, Miss Marple stood alone in the Bodleian courtyard. Early light filtered through drifting clouds, and she lifted her face to the soft warmth. She whispered not to anyone present, but to the scholars who had lived 1,000 years before. I have heard your message, and I will carry it forward. Dr. Hale and Samira joined her moments later. What now? Dr. Hale asked. Miss Marple smiled gently. Now, we return the missing page to the world, and we ensure its message is not lost again. Samira nodded. The circle of light would approve. Miss Marple held her cane, feeling its familiar weight. The Golden Age, she said thoughtfully, was not simply a period of history. It was a demonstration of what humanity can achieve when we choose openness over fear. Dr. Hale looked up at the sky. Do you think another Golden Age is possible? Miss Marple gave a warm, wise smile. My dear boy, every age can be golden. The question is only whether we tend the light. They walked together beneath the ancient archway of the library, leaving behind the courtyard where truth had resurfaced, and as Miss Marple stepped out into the brightening day, she felt certainly certain that the circle of light had entrusted their message to the right hands. Her steps were steady, her heart full, because knowledge, once rekindled, never truly dies.